banned from the wedding. How I liquidated a 2M estate for revenge. I spent my entire adult life looking at spreadsheets, calculating risks as a chief financial officer for a Fortune 500 company. I knew how to spot a bad investment from a mile away. I just never realized the absolute worst investment of my entire life was sleeping in the master bedroom of my own house while I was relegated to the guest room down the hall. Last Friday night was supposed to be a celebration. We were at Le Bernardin, one of the most expensive seafood restaurants in Manhattan. The lighting was perfectly dim, the tablecloths were crisp white, and the air smelled of old money and quiet judgment. I was sitting across from my wife Patricia and her 26-year-old daughter, Madison. Madison was glowing. She had that influencer shine, the kind that only comes from weekly expensive facials and a life completely free of any manual labor. She was scrolling through her phone, probably checking the engagement on her latest post about the exhausting stress of wedding planning. I sat there sipping my sparkling water, waiting. The waiter placed the bill on the table. It was heavy, bound in leather. Without even looking up from her screen, Madison slid a cream-colored envelope across the table toward me. It was the official wedding invitation. The paper was thick, hand-pressed cotton with gold leaf lettering. I knew the texture intimately, because I was the one who had paid $5,000 for the custom printing. I opened it, naturally expecting to see my name listed as the host. Traditionally, the father of the bride, or in this case, the stepfather who had funded every single aspect of the girl's existence, is listed at the top. I scanned the elegant script. Mr. and Mrs. Gary Miller request the honor of your presence at the marriage of their daughter. Madison, I froze. Gary Miller, her biological father, the man who had not paid a single dime in child support since 1998. The man who showed up once a year smelling of cheap beer with a broken toy, then disappeared the moment the rent was due. My name was nowhere on the invitation. I looked up at Madison. She was not looking at me. She was using her silver butter knife to dissect a scallop. Madison, I said, keeping my voice perfectly low so as not to cause a scene. I think there is a misprint here. My name is missing. She finally looked up. Her eyes were the exact same shade of blue as her mother's, and they held the exact same capacity for casual cruelty. It is not a mistake, Robert. We talked about it. Gary is walking me down the aisle. I felt a cold pressure tightening in my chest. I placed the invitation down on the crisp tablecloth. But Gary is not hosting this wedding. I am. I have already put down $80,000 in non-refundable deposits. The venue, the flowers, the premium catering. Gary has not contributed a single cent. Madison sighed, the kind of dramatic, long-suffering sigh she usually reserved for when a waiter brought her tap water instead of bottled sparkling. Please do not make this about money, Robert. You always make it about money. This is about aesthetics. Gary is my real dad. He has that rugged, artistic look. It fits the vintage vineyard vibe we are going for. You have to admit, you are a bit corporate. You look stiff in photos. We want the pictures to be absolutely perfect for Vogue. I looked at Patricia, my wife of 15 years, the woman I had taken on luxury cruises to the Mediterranean. The woman whose massive credit card debts I had quietly cleared when we got married. Surely she would speak up. Surely she would tell her daughter that this was incredibly disrespectful to the man who paid for her teeth to be straightened and her useless degree from NYU. I waited. Patricia took a delicate sip of her Chardonnay. She dabbed her lips with the linen napkin and completely avoided my eyes. Honey, she said softly, speaking to me, not to Madison. It is her special day. We just want her to be happy. Gary is family. You know how sensitive he is about his status. We do not want him to feel excluded. Excluded. The word hung in the air like foul smoke. The man who abandoned them was family. The man who paid the mortgage and funded the trust accounts was an accessory that simply did not match the wedding decor. I looked down at the leather bill folder. $800 for a dinner, where I was explicitly told I was not photogenic enough to be considered a father. I did not yell. I did not flip the table. Years in the corporate boardroom had taught me that when you allow yourself to become emotional, you lose all your leverage. I pulled out my American Express black card. The heavy metal card clinked against the fine china. I understand, I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. I want the photos to be perfect, too. Madison clapped her hands together, a brilliant, fake smile spreading across her face. Thank you, Robert. I knew you would get it. Oh, and since you are being so understanding, Tyler and I were thinking about upgrading the champagne toast to Dom Perignon. It is only an extra $4,000. I looked at her smile. I saw the expensive braces I had paid for. I saw the elite dermatology appointments I had covered. I saw the monstrous entitlement that I had personally watered and fertilized for a decade and a half. Order whatever you want, I said. The ride back to Connecticut was suffocatingly silent. The interior of my Mercedes was soundproof, sealing us in with the heavy tension. I always drove. Patricia sat in the passenger seat, mindlessly scrolling through her iPad. Madison was in the back, frantically texting her fiancé, Tyler. I watched the glittering city lights fade into the dark, empty stretches of the highway. My mind was racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour, but my face was carved from stone. I was doing the math, not the math of the wedding budget, but the math of my entire life. I calculated the years I had postponed my own retirement to fund their lavish lifestyle. I calculated the investment portfolio I had liquidated to buy the massive colonial house in Greenwich, just because Patricia said she needed to be closer to her high society friends. Patricia cleared her throat. The sound was like nails on a chalkboard in the quiet car. "Robert," she said, her voice dripping with that fake, sugary sweetness she always used when she was about to ask for something unreasonable. I was thinking, since Gary is walking Madison down the aisle, he needs to look the part. He does not have a proper suit. I kept my eyes fixed firmly on the road and... She hesitated for a split second, then plunged right in. "You have that beautiful charcoal Armani suit in your closet. The custom one you wore to the charity gala last year. You and Gary are about the same size now that he has lost some weight. I was wondering if we could borrow it for him, just for the weekend. We really do not want him looking shabby next to Madison." I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned stark white. They did not just want to replace me. They wanted to strip me for parts. They wanted to dress the deadbeat biological father in my custom clothes so he could successfully play the role of the wealthy, successful patriarch. It was almost funny in a grotesque, twisted way. I took a slow, deep breath. If I exploded now, they would immediately paint me as the villain. They would tell all their friends I was jealous, petty, and controlling. I needed to be smarter. I needed to be the invisible ghost they already thought I was. "Sure," I said. My voice sounded flat, even to my own ears. "He can borrow the suit, really." Patricia sounded genuinely surprised. "Oh, thank you, honey. You are being so big about this." I know it is awkward, but it means the absolute world to Madison. From the back seat, Madison chirped, "Thanks, Robert. You are a lifesaver. Gary is going to look so hot." Hot, she was talking about her father. I felt a wave of pure nausea wash over me. I reached over and turned on the radio to drown out their voices. I put on a classical station, letting the sweeping violins fill the suffocating space. I needed to think. I needed a flawless plan. The wedding was in 3 weeks, the final payments for the luxury venue, and the caterer were due in exactly 5 days. That was my window. I had 5 days to completely dismantle 15 years of lies. We finally pulled into the driveway of the colonial house I had bought 3 years ago. It was a sprawling, gorgeous estate with massive white pillars and a manicured lawn that cost more to maintain than most people earned in a year. The porch light was on. From the outside, it looked like the perfect American dream. Inside, it was nothing but a hollow shell. I carried their expensive shopping bags inside. Madison went straight up to her room to FaceTime Tyler. Patricia went straight to the kitchen to pour herself another massive glass of wine. I told them I had some urgent work to finish in my study. I walked down the long hallway to my office. The house was filled with beautiful things I had paid for. The authentic Persian rug in the foyer, the abstract painting in the hallway that Madison had insisted was a brilliant investment. The grand piano that absolutely no one in the house knew how to play. I felt like a complete stranger walking through a museum dedicated to my own exploitation. I entered my study and closed the heavy oak door. This was the only room in the entire house that actually felt like mine. It was lined with mahogany bookshelves and smelled of old paper and rich leather. I sat down at my desk. I did not turn on the computer. I just sat there in the dark for a moment, listening. I could hear Patricia's voice drifting from the kitchen. She must have thought I was completely out of earshot, or perhaps she simply didn't care anymore. She was on the phone. He actually said yes to the suit. Patricia was laughing, a high tinkling laugh that sounded like breaking glass. I know, right? I thought he would put up a massive fight, but he is so desperate to be liked. He just rolled right over. There was a pause while the person on the other end spoke. I knew instantly who it was, Gary. Yeah, well, he is useful, Patricia continued, pouring more wine. We just need to keep him sweet until after the honeymoon expenses are completely covered. Madison wants to go to the Maldives. It is going to be another 20 grand. Once the wedding is over, we can finally talk about the house. I think I can convince him to downsize to a condo so we can cash out some of the equity. You could get that new truck you wanted. My blood ran absolutely cold. It wasn't just about the wedding. It was a calculated, long-term parasitism. They were planning to bleed me entirely dry and then just discard the empty husk. I heard Gary's voice, faint and tinny through the speakerphone. What an old fool. Does he suspect anything about the prenup? No, Patricia scoffed loudly. He thinks he is so smart with his finance degree, but he is incredibly soft when it comes to family. He sees himself as the grand savior. It is pathetic, really. He is just an old ATM machine that needs a little oiling now and then. An old ATM machine, that was it. That was the exact sentence that severed the very last thread of affection I held for these people. The simmering anger in my gut flash boiled into something else. Something much colder, something entirely lethal. I stood up and walked to the painting hanging behind my desk. I swung it aside to reveal the hidden wall safe. I spun the dial left to 32, right to 15, left to 8. The heavy steel door clicked open. Inside were neat stacks of documents, passports and backup hard drives. I reached for a thick blue folder, right at the bottom. It was labeled Premarital Assets and Estate Planning. I pulled it out and laid it flat on the desk. I turned on the green banker's lamp. The warm light pooled on the documents. I opened the folder. Right on top was the original deed to the house. I ran my finger slowly over the legal description. Purchased by Robert Sullivan as sole owner. Because Patricia had terrible credit issues from her disastrous first marriage to Gary, her name was never once on the deed. We had signed a strict post-nuptial agreement years ago that stated any asset acquired with funds from my pre-retirement accounts remained my sole property. I looked at the next document, the Revocable Living Trust. It controlled all the access to the accounts Patricia used for her daily lavish spending. I looked at the thick stack of wedding vendor contracts. Every single one of them was signed by me, not Madison, not Tyler, me. I was not just the ATM machine. I was the bank owner, and the bank was about to permanently close its doors. I checked the time. It was exactly 11:30 p.m. on a Friday. Most reasonable people would wait until Monday morning to call their lawyer. I was not most reasonable people. I picked up my phone and dialed a secure number I had not called in years. It rang twice. Sullivan. A grumbly voice rasped. It was late, but Arthur Blackwood never slept. He was the kind of ruthless attorney you hired when you wanted to completely scorch the earth and salt the ground. Arthur, I said quietly, I apologize for the extremely late hour. You are the only client who ever apologizes, Arthur grunted, likely lighting a cigar. What is wrong? You sound like you are staring directly at a dead body. Not yet, I said, glancing at the framed photo of Patricia and me on my desk. I knocked the silver frame face down. But I need to liquidate a property fast. I need a cash buyer closed in exactly 7 days. Which property? Arthur asked. The house I am currently standing in, I said. There was a heavy silence on the other line. Then Arthur chuckled, a dry, dusty sound. The Greenwich estate. Patricia is not going to like that at all. Patricia is not going to know, I said. Not until the locks are permanently changed. And Arthur, I need to cancel some checks, a lot of checks. I heard the distinct click of his lighter. Start talking, Robert. I have a pen. For the next solid hour, I laid out the precise architecture of their absolute destruction. I did not raise my voice once. I did not cry. I simply moved assets from column A to column B. I instructed Arthur to trigger the strict penalty clauses in all the wedding contracts. I authorized the immediate sale of the massive house to a holding company that specialized exclusively in distressed purchases. They would happily buy it for 20% under market value if they could take full possession in 48 hours. Tell them to take the deal, I commanded. I did not care about the financial loss. I would have gladly burned the house down to the foundation if it wasn't illegal. Losing some money was perfectly acceptable. Losing my dignity was not. When I finally hung up the phone, the house was incredibly quiet. Patricia and Madison were asleep upstairs, peacefully dreaming of Armani suits and Maldives beaches. They had absolutely no idea that the luxury roof over their heads was already sold. They had no idea that the shiny credit cards in their designer wallets were already dead plastic. I walked to the window and looked out at the swimming pool glowing electric blue in the moonlight. I remembered teaching Madison how to swim in that very pool. I remembered paying off Gary's massive gambling debts so he wouldn't go to jail, just so Madison wouldn't have a convicted felon for a father. I had been a good man. I had been a deeply generous man. But tonight, Robert the father officially died. Robert the CFO was firmly back in charge, and the upcoming audit was going to be brutally unforgiving. The next morning, the sun hit the breakfast nook with that aggressive, blinding cheerfulness that only happens when your entire life is actively falling apart. Madison was already sitting at the table, completely surrounded by glossy bridal magazines. She was circling expensive flower arrangements with a red marker. Patricia was making smoothies, the blender whirring loudly, effectively drowning out any need for actual conversation. "Morning, Robert," Patricia shouted over the terrible noise. She poured a thick green sludge into a glass and slammed it down in front of me. "Drink up. You looked a little tired last night. We have a massive day. The florist appointment is at 10, and then we need to go to the tailor for Gary's big fitting." I looked at the disgusting smoothie, kale and ginger, the literal taste of penance. I took a slow sip. "Actually," I said, setting the glass down carefully, "I was thinking we should heavily expand the flower budget." Madison's head snapped up, her eyes went incredibly wide. "Really?" I nodded, keeping my face completely neutral. "I was thinking about what you said last night, about the aesthetics. If Gary is walking you down the aisle, we really need the path to be spectacular. Maybe those imported orchids you liked, the rare ones from Thailand." Madison squealed. She actually squealed like a child. "Oh my God, Robert. Those are like triple the price." "Does it matter?" I asked, casually spreading cream cheese on a bagel. "You only get married once. Let's make it fully Vogue-worthy." Patricia beamed at me. She walked around the counter and kissed the top of my head. "See, I told you he would come around. He just needed a good night's sleep." I smiled. It was a tight, thin smile, but they were far too absorbed in their own greed to notice the difference. "Call the florist," I said. "Tell them to double the massive order and just put it on my tab." I watched Madison scramble desperately for her phone, her manicured fingers flying across the screen. She was texting Tyler, probably telling him that the old ATM was generously dispensing cash again. While she was entirely distracted, my phone vibrated intensely in my pocket. It was a secure text from Arthur Blackwood. "House sale contracts ready. Buyer wired the funds. Escrow closes Monday morning. You have 48 hours to vacate." I felt a massive surge of adrenaline. It was done. The clock was officially ticking. We spent the entire day hemorrhaging money. At the florist, I aggressively approved a $20,000 archway. At the tailor, I happily paid for expedited alterations on my own suit so it would stretch to fit Gary's beer gut. I stood right there in the fitting room, watching. The tailor painfully pinned the fine fabric of my Italian wool suit around the man who had slept with my wife while I was at work 20 years ago. Gary was preening in the long mirror. "Not bad, Bob," he said, admiring my reflection. "You have decent taste. Little tight in the shoulders, but I will make it work." "You certainly do," I said coldly. He turned to me, suddenly lowering his voice. "Hey, about the bachelor party. Tyler and I were thinking Vegas, just a quick, crazy weekend. We might need a little injection of funds, to do it right." I looked at him. This awful man had absolutely no shame. It was a bottomless pit of need. "Send me the full itinerary." I said smoothly. "I will definitely take care of it." Gary aggressively clapped me on the back. "You are a good sport, Bob. I don't care what Patty says about you being a bore. You are all right." I mentally added the Vegas trip to the long list of things I would cancel on Monday morning. The weekend was an absolute blur of reckless spending. I became the ultimate yes man they had always desperately wanted. I approved the premium platinum open bar, I approved the massive 12-piece jazz orchestra. Instead of a DJ, I approved the ridiculous fireworks display. And with every single yes, I clearly saw Madison's respect for me diminish even further. To her, I wasn't a generous father. I was a pathetic servant finally learning his place. But I had a brilliant strategy. I made sure to forget my wallet at every single vendor. "Tyler," I said at the caterer, gesturing helplessly. "Put the deposit down. It is just $5,000 to hold the date. I will write you a check for the full amount on Monday morning when the markets open. Plus, think of the points." Tyler happily handed over his credit card. Madison nodded encouragingly. By Sunday night, the estimated cost of the wedding had ballooned to an astronomical $150,000. Madison was ecstatic, Patricia was incredibly smug, Gary was drunk on my expensive scotch, and almost all of the massive deposits were sitting heavily on Tyler and Madison's credit cards. Sunday night, we gathered in the living room. The mood was intensely electric. Madison was high on the pure adrenaline of spending. Gary raised his glass to the happy couple. He toasted, and to Robert, Patricia added as an afterthought, "for being so supportive." "To Monday," I said, raising my glass of water. They thought I was toasting the day I would transfer the massive funds. They had no idea I was toasting their brutal execution. Monday morning arrived with heavy gray skies. I dressed in my sharpest work clothes, even though I was fully retired. "Old habits die hard. Where are you going?" Patricia asked from the bed. She was wearing a silk eye mask. "Meeting with the financial planner," I lied effortlessly. "Just moving some heavy funds around to cover the wedding checks." "Good," she mumbled, rolling over lazily. "Make sure you transfer enough for the honeymoon, too." I walked downstairs. The house was completely silent. I walked out the front door and locked it. I quickly keyed in the code to the secure lockbox I had installed on the porch railing earlier that morning. I placed the house key inside. I walked to my car. I did not look back. I drove to a quiet coffee shop in town, ordered a black coffee, sat by the window, and waited. At 9 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was an automated notification from the bank. All accounts frozen. Authorized user cards declined. At 9:15 a.m., the first frantic text came. It was from Madison. "Dad, I'm at the spa. My card just got declined. It's so embarrassing. Can you fix it?" I did not reply. At 9:30 a.m., the real estate agent called. "The moving crew is at the house. Mr. Sullivan, they are asking if the residents are ready to leave." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Proceed," I said. 6 a.m., my phone began to ring endlessly. Patricia, Madison, Gary, Tyler, the florist, the caterer. I watched the screen light up, name after name after name. I felt a strange, profound sense of peace. I let it ring. I had a busy day ahead. I had a flight to catch. But first, I had one last stop to make. I needed to leave them a parting gift. I drove back to the house one last time. The massive moving trucks were already completely filling up the driveway. Patricia was standing frantically on the front lawn wearing her silk bathrobe, screaming violently at a man with a clipboard. She looked wild, entirely desperate. I parked down the street and watched. She spotted my car. She started running towards me, her face twisted in pure rage. "Robert," she screamed, "what have you done?" I rolled up the window and drove away. While Madison and Patricia had spent the last 2 days getting seaweed wraps that cost more than my first car, the house had undergone a complete transformation. It did not look like a home anymore. It looked like a warehouse going out of business. In the massive dining room, the solid mahogany table that seated 12 was totally gone. In the living room, the Italian leather sofas were in the truck. I went upstairs to the master bedroom and had the movers take the memory foam mattress. I left the box spring. It felt incredibly petty, but then I remembered the conversation I had overheard about putting me in the basement. Petty was just a matter of perspective. The last thing to go was the art. As the movers took down the original oil paintings I had collected over decades, the walls looked naked. At 6 p.m. the previous day, the trucks were full. The foreman had handed me the tablet to sign. I had walked into the kitchen one last time. It was the only room with light, as I had instructed the electric company to cut the power to the rest of the house. I placed the envelope on the counter, the one with the eviction notice and the cancellation receipts. I pulled up a single metal folding chair I had saved from the garage. I placed it facing the envelope. It looked like a shrine to the end of their world. I had walked out the back door, got into my car, and left. I was already 30,000 feet over the Atlantic Ocean, sipping a glass of warm whiskey in first class, when the black Lincoln Navigator pulled back into the empty driveway of the Greenwich estate. I can picture the scene with absolute terrifying clarity, not because I was there, but because I had spent 15 years studying the parasitic habits of these two women. It was Wednesday afternoon. Patricia and Madison were stepping out of the car, floating on a cloud of entitlement, completely unaware that the ground beneath them had been incinerated. The first sign that something was wrong was the absolute silence. Usually, the house hummed. Today, the house was dark. The curtains in the upstairs windows were completely gone. Patricia walked up the front steps and punched in the code on the smart lock. Her birthday, the keypad flashed red. She tried again, red, denied. Rober, open the door. She probably yelled. Madison tried her code, red, denied. Madison stepped off the porch and walked to the large bay window of the living room. She peered inside. I wish I could have seen her face. I wish I could have seen the exact moment her brain tried to process the visual data. The living room was entirely gone. There was nothing but an expanse of hardwood floor that stretched out into the shadows. Mom, she whispered. The house, it's empty. They panicked. They ran around the back of the house. They finally remembered the spare key hidden inside the fake rock near the garden hose. They burst into the kitchen breathless, ready to confront intruders. Silence answered them, a heavy, dusty silence. The refrigerator door was slightly ajar, revealing the dark, empty shelves inside. And then they saw it. In the center of the kitchen, sitting entirely alone, was the single metal folding chair facing the thick manila envelope. Patricia reached the envelope first. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely open the clasp. She pulled out the documents. The first page was the closing statement from the sale of the property. It showed the sale date. It showed the move-out deadline. Today, 5:00 p.m., it showed the net proceeds wired to an offshore account they had never seen before. Sold, she whispered, the words strangling in her throat. He sold the house. Madison violently grabbed the second stack of papers. These were the receipts from the wedding vendors. Florist canceled, caterer canceled, venue canceled, band canceled. Every single dream, every single imported orchid, every single lobster tail she had ordered. Canceled. No, Madison moaned. She leaned heavily against the counter, her legs completely giving way. No, no, no. The wedding is in 4 days. He can't do this. But there was one more piece of paper in the envelope. A handwritten note on my personal stationery. Dear Patricia and Madison, you wanted a wedding hosted by the father of the bride. You made it very clear that Gary is the father, and I am just the bank. I have decided to respect your wishes. I have removed myself and my bank from the equation. The house has been sold. You are currently trespassing. The wedding contracts were in my name. Since I am not the father, I have canceled them. Gary, as the real father, is free to rebook them. Do not look for me. I am gone, and do not look for the money. It is gone too. Signed, Robert. The scream that tore out of Madison's throat was primal. It wasn't a cry of heartbreak. It was the intense rage of a parasite that had just been violently ripped from its host. He ruined my life, she shrieked, brutally kicking the folding chair. Where are we going to sleep? Patricia whimpered from the floor, looking around the empty shell of the mansion. Then the front door opened. Heavy footsteps thudded in the foyer. It was Gary. He had finally arrived, probably looking for a cold beer and a free place to crash. Hey, he yelled out. Why is the TV gone? Madison began to laugh. It was a high, hysterical sound that bordered on absolute madness. Welcome home, Dad, she screamed at the empty ceiling. Welcome home! The silence in the kitchen was broken not by a scream, but by a massive vibration. It was Madison's phone, then Patricia's phone buzzed, then Tyler's, who had just walked through the open back door, freezing in his tracks as he surveyed the complete emptiness. It was a symphony of digital notifications, a firing squad finally assembling for the execution. I had timed the cancellation emails to go out at exactly 5:00 p.m. in the corporate world. 5 o'clock on a Wednesday is when you expertly deliver terrible news, so you do not have to deal with the fallout. But for them, there would be no next morning. Madison picked up her phone. It was an email from the premium catering company. The subject line was in all caps. Urgent cancellation and outstanding balance. She read it out loud. her voice thin and reedy. Per the contract signed by you and Mr. Tyler Fists, all outstanding balances are due upon cancellation. She stopped, she swallowed hard, read the number. Tyler snapped. His face was intensely pale. He knew what was coming. Madison choked out the massive figure. $42,580. They are charging us the full amount because the food has already been ordered. They say if we do not wire the funds by tomorrow at noon, they will file a massive lawsuit. 40 grand, Gary laughed nervously. That is a mistake. Just call Bob. He is not playing games. Dad, Madison screamed, spinning on him. He is gone. He sold the house. Another notification pinged, the florist. Madison stared at the bright screen. Celine says she already ordered the flowers from Thailand. She is charging the card on file for the remaining $15,000. The card on file. All eyes turned to Tyler. It was his card, the one his wealthy parents had co-signed, the one he was so proud to flash around when he thought I was going to reimburse him. Tyler frantically unlocked his phone. He opened his banking app. I can only imagine the color entirely draining from his face as he saw the massive pending transactions. No, Tyler whispered. No, that is my parents' money. That is the down payment for our house. He looked up at Madison, and there was no love in his eyes. There was only the cold, hard calculation of a man realizing he had made a terrible investment. You told me he would pay, Madison. You stood there and told me to swipe the card. He always pays, Madison cried. I don't know why he is doing this. You pushed him too far, Patricia whispered from the floor. The suit, the wedding invitation, you humiliated him. Oh, shut up, Mom! Madison yelled. You were the one laughing about it. Tyler stepped into the room. He looked at Gary, who was standing there in his dirty t-shirt, looking completely useless. My credit score, Tyler shouted. Do you know what this is going to do to my credit score? My dad is going to literally kill me. Tyler, baby, we can fix this, Madison pleaded, reaching out for him. Tyler stepped back from her touch, as if she were deeply contagious. There is no we, Madison. Not anymore. I signed up to marry a Sullivan. I signed up for the trust fund and the security. I did not sign up to marry the daughter of him. He pointed a shaking finger directly at Gary. Gary bristled. Hey, watch your mouth, kid. Then you pay for it. Tyler sneered. You are the father of the bride, right? Pull out your wallet, Gary. Write the check for $57,000. Go ahead. I am waiting. The room fell completely silent. The harsh truth hung in the air. Gary didn't have $57. Tyler let out a bitter laugh. You are all frauds. You are absolutely nothing. Tyler turned around and walked back to the door. Where are you going? Madison screamed, running after him. The wedding is in 4 days. What am I supposed to tell people? Tell them the groom came to his senses, Tyler said without looking back. He walked out the door, got into his leased BMW, and peeled out of the empty driveway. Madison stood in the doorway, watching the taillights disappear. But she was left with nothing but a massive cancellation fee. She looked at her phone again. Another email, the wedding planner. Due to non-payment of the final installment, we are releasing your date. Deposit is non-refundable. She slid down the doorframe until she hit the floor. Robert, she whimpered into the darkness. Daddy, please pick up the phone. But the phone she was calling was sitting heavily at the bottom of a trash can in an airport terminal, and the man she was calling was currently ordering a glass of Chianti 4,000 miles away. I had checked into a luxury suite at the St. Regis in New York City, waiting for my evening flight to Rome. It was a sterile, beautiful room that smelled of starch and expensive chilies, a welcome change from the hollowed-out carcass of the house in Greenwich. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water and opened my iPad. I had silenced my phone, but I knew the storm was raging. I just did not know the wind speed until I logged onto Instagram. I had created a burner account years ago to closely monitor Madison's reckless spending habits. Today, her profile was not showcasing designer bags. It was showcasing a total tragedy. She was live. The notification said she had 40,000 viewers. I clicked on the video. Madison was sitting on the floor of the empty kitchen I had vacated hours earlier. She had set up her ring light, because even in the depths of absolute despair, lighting is paramount. She was wearing a hoodie mine, an old university sweatshirt she had never touched before today. She had wiped off most of her makeup, leaving just enough mascara smudged under her eyes to strongly suggest hours of weeping. "Hey guys," she whispered, her voice cracking perfectly. "I did not want to make this video. I really didn't, but I don't know where else to turn." She paused, looking down at her hands. The comments section was scrolling so fast, a blur of broken heart emojis and incredibly angry faces. "My stepfather, Robert, the man I have called Dad for 15 years, he abandoned us." She looked directly into the camera lens, and for a second I had to admire the performance. It was entirely Oscar-worthy. "He left us with nothing," she continued, a single tear tracking down her cheek. "He sold our house without telling us. He canceled my wedding 4 days before the ceremony. He emptied the bank accounts, and the worst part, he did it because he was jealous." I took a sip of water. Jealous? That was the angle. He was jealous that I wanted to reconnect with my biological father. "Gary," she sobbed. "Gary has been trying so hard to be in my life, and Robert just couldn't handle not being the center of attention. I didn't think he would actually leave my mom and me homeless." The lie was so audacious it took my breath away. She had surgically removed her own cruelty, excised the insults, and stitched the narrative back together to make me the total monster. She didn't mention the arrogant demands for the Armani suit. She didn't mention the "just Robert" comment. She didn't mention the massive debt she and Tyler had racked up on their own. I watched the aggressive comments. The internet mob was fully awake. "What a psycho. This is financial abuse. Dox him. If anyone sees him," Madison sniffled. "Please just tell him we are sorry. We just want him to come home." It was a masterclass in manipulation. She was painting a massive target on my back while holding a begging bowl. I closed the iPad. I did not feel anger. I felt a cold, detached satisfaction in her utter desperation to destroy me. She had made a fatal tactical error. She had gone public. In a court of law, a private conversation is hearsay. A live stream with 40,000 witnesses is solid evidence. But the internet works much faster than the law. I needed to return the rental car before my flight. I had rented a nondescript sedan, but I had forgotten one vital detail. My face was now heavily circulating on every smartphone. Madison had posted a photo of me, fitting her narrative of the cold tyrant. I was only a few blocks from the hotel when a red light stopped me at a busy intersection. I saw a group of teenagers on the corner. One of them looked up, pointed, and shouted something to his friends. Recognition dawned on their faces. It wasn't the look of fans, it was the look of hunters. "That's him," the kid screamed. "That's the deadbeat." One of the kids had a cup of something in his hand, a thick red smoothie. He ran into the street. "For Madison!" he yelled, and he violently hurled the cup at my car. It exploded against the driver's side window. Thick red liquid splattered across the glass, dripping down like a horror movie, special effect. The other kids cheered. They had their phones out filming. I did not roll down the window. I did not get out to confront them. That is what they desperately wanted. The light turned green. I turned on the windshield wipers. The rubber blades dragged the red sludge across the glass, smearing it before clearing a small arc of visibility. I drove through the intersection, keeping my pulse incredibly steady. Let them stare. Let them hate. They were watching a movie where they had entirely missed the first act. I drove to the airport, returned the car, and paid the massive cleaning fee. I found a quiet corner in the first-class lounge and called Arthur Blackwood. "Did you see it?" Arthur asked, his voice gravely. "I saw it," I said, "and I saw the paint on my car. Good." Arthur said, "That is assault and property damage incited by a public figure. We just added 2 zeros to the countersuit settlement figure." "Are you safe?" "I am boarding in an hour," I said. "Arthur, I want you to preserve that video, way ahead of you." "Robert," Arthur replied, "she is digging her own grave with a ring light." I hung up, boarded my flight, and flew to Rome. While the digital mob was banging for blood on the internet, I knew that virtual threats rarely stayed virtual for long. I had rented a small, unassuming townhouse on the outskirts of the city, listed under a shell company. Or so I thought. Gary had likely spent the last few hours aggressively terrorizing my former neighbors until one of them gave up the address. It was just past midnight when I heard it, the sound of a truck engine roaring down the quiet street. I was sitting in the living room in the dark. I checked the app on my phone. The notification was green. System armed. Camera 1 recording. Camera 2 recording. I adjusted the collar of my shirt and stood perfectly in the line of sight of the wide-angle lens hidden in the bookshelf. Then came the intense pounding against the front door. "Open up, you coward!" Gary's voice was slurred, thick with cheap whiskey. "I know you are in there." I did not move. The pounding stopped for a second, replaced by the sound of glass shattering. A hand reached in, fumbling for the lock. The door swung open with a massive crash. Gary stumbled into the foyer. His eyes were bloodshot. He held a heavy baseball bat in one hand, dragging it across the floorboards. "There you are," he sneered, squinting into the darkness. "Sitting there like a king, while my daughter cries her eyes out." He raised the bat. "You think you can just cut people off? You think money makes you a man?" I looked at his sloppy stance. Decades ago, I was a sergeant in the United States Marine Corps. I knew exactly how to easily disarm a man with a bat. My muscles tensed, but I forced my hands to stay perfectly at my sides. If I fought back, it was mutual combat, but if I stood still and let him attack an unarmed senior citizen in his own home, that was a massive felony. That was prison time. I made the calculation in a split second. I chose the pain. "Gary," I said, keeping my voice calm and loud enough for the hidden microphone. "Please leave. You are trespassing. I do not want any trouble." "Trouble." Gary laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "You are the trouble, Bob." He swung. He didn't use the bat, thank God. He lunged at me with his fists. His first punch caught me hard on the jaw. My head snapped back. I tasted copper. I stumbled back, feigning more weakness than I felt, and fell against the bookshelf. "Please," I said, holding up my hands defensively, making absolutely sure not to strike back. "Gary, stop, shut up," he screamed. He grabbed me by the collar and slammed me against the wall, striking me again in the ribs. The pain was extremely sharp. I let myself slide down the wall to the floor, curling into a ball. "Is that all you got?" He spat, brutally kicking me in the thigh. "You are pathetic." I stayed down. I counted the seconds. I knew the silent alarm had been automatically triggered the moment the glass broke. Gary was panting, standing over me, feeling like a conqueror. "See how it feels," he taunted. "See how it feels to be powerless. I am not the one who is powerless." "Gary," I whispered. Before he could process what I meant, the room was suddenly bathed in red and blue light. The police cruiser was right outside. Gary froze. Confusion washed over his flushed face. "Police, show me your hands." Two officers burst through the door, weapons drawn. They saw a shattered window, a baseball bat on the floor, an elderly man bleeding, and a drunk man standing over him. "Get on the ground now," the officer roared. Gary tried to step back. "Wait, no, you don't understand. He started it." The officer tackled Gary aggressively to the floor. I watched as they securely handcuffed him and read him his rights. "Bob," Gary pleaded, his eyes wide with pure terror. "Tell them it was a misunderstanding. I have a record. They will violate my parole." I slowly pulled myself up. I wiped the blood from my lip. "I want to fully press charges," I said clearly, "and I have the entire incident on video." Gary's knees buckled. In that moment, he finally knew. He hadn't walked into a fight. He had walked into a steel trap. As they forcefully dragged him out the door, I stopped the recording. I had just effortlessly traded a split lip for my enemy's total freedom. It was a very fair trade. Saturday came, but the sun did not. The forecast predicted a torrential downpour for Connecticut. It was the absolute perfect weather for a funeral, which was appropriate, because a marriage was about to completely die before it even took its first breath. I watched the live stream from my hotel balcony in Rome. Madison, in her infinite need for attention, had insisted on live streaming the terrible ceremony. The venue had changed. The wedding took place in the muddy backyard of Tyler's parents' house. A blue plastic tarp had been strung up between two trees to serve as the altar, flapping violently in the wind. Madison stepped out wearing the $10,000 gown that I had refused to pay for. As soon as her satin heel touched the ground, she sank into the thick, hungry mud. A brown stain began to wick up the expensive fabric. Tyler was waiting for her under the blue tarp, looking completely miserable. He wasn't looking at Madison with love. He was looking at her with the cold, hard realization of what his life had become. "Let's just get this over with," Tyler muttered. A massive gust of wind ripped the blue tarp loose. It dumped a gallon of collected rainwater directly onto Tyler's head. That was the absolute breaking point. Tyler wiped the water from his eyes. "I can't do this," he said. We are standing in the mud. Your dad is in jail. Your mom is homeless. You were supposed to come with a house and a trust fund. He turned around and started forcefully walking back toward the house. Madison tried to run after him, but her dress was heavily weighed down by pounds of mud. She tripped and fell face first into the sludge, the princess in the mud. Tyler didn't look back. He walked inside and slammed the door. The live stream ended abruptly. I closed my laptop and took a slow sip of espresso. The wedding was over. The marriage was entirely dead. The alliance of parasites had violently turned on each other. Tyler had escaped, but he was financially ruined. Madison was socially destroyed. I was free. But I wasn't finished. There was one act left. The courtroom smelled of floor wax and stale coffee, a scent I had deeply associated with corporate mergers for 40 years. But today, it smelled like the final act of a satisfying tragedy. I sat at the defendant's table wearing a bespoke navy suit. Across the aisle, Patricia sat hunched over, wearing a black dress that looked 2 sizes too big. Next to her sat her sleazy lawyer, Mr. Sterling, tapping his pen aggressively, trying to intimidate me. My lawyer, Arthur Blackwood, sat perfectly still. Judge Harrison entered. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s. "Mr. Sterling, you may begin," she said. Sterling stood up. "Your Honor, my client has been the victim of severe financial abuse. Mr. Sullivan secretly sold their marital home and fled the country. We are asking for spousal support in the amount of $10,000 a month and 50% of the entire marital estate. Mr. Sullivan claims there is a postnuptial agreement, but this document was signed heavily under duress." Arthur Blackwood stood up slowly. "Your Honor, we are here to debate facts." He picked up a document. The postnuptial agreement was signed 5 years ago, notarized, and heavily reviewed by independent counsel. The reason for this agreement is completely relevant. Mrs. Sullivan had intentionally incurred $150,000 in massive gambling debts. Patricia completely froze. She hadn't told her lawyer about that. Arthur placed a massive stack of bank statements on the judge's bench. Mr. Sullivan agreed to pay off a loan shark to completely prevent physical harm to his wife on one absolute condition: that she completely waive her rights to his premarital assets to protect his financial future from her intense addiction. That is a bailout. Patricia's face turned bright red. Sterling looked at her furiously. Furthermore, Arthur continued, holding up a small USB drive, the agreement contains a strict conspiracy to defraud clause. If she conspires against the financial interests of the primary earner, all spousal support is permanently forfeited. I would like to introduce Exhibit C, a digital audio recording. Arthur pressed play. The courtroom speakers crackled, and Gary's arrogant voice filled the room. "We were thinking maybe after the wedding, it is time for a change. Sell this place, use the cash." Then came the kill shot, recorded later that night. She says once the honeymoon is paid for, she is going to file for divorce anyway. We just need to get him to liquidate the house first, so it becomes cash. Then we take half. Absolute dead silence. Sterling sat down and closed his folder. He knew when a massive ship had completely sunk. Judge Harrison looked at Patricia with palpable disgust. "The claim of duress is entirely denied," the judge said. "The postnuptial agreement is completely valid and enforceable. I am granting Mr. Sullivan's motion to dismiss the request for spousal support with extreme prejudice. Mrs. Sullivan, you are awarded absolutely nothing." The gavel banged like a gunshot. Dismissed. I walked out of the courtroom doors. Patricia begged me for help, but I told her to wait for Gary to get out of jail. The hallway was bright and quiet. I stepped out into the sunlight. "Dad!" I heard the frantic clacking of heels. Madison caught up to me, breathless. Her eyes were swollen, her clothes unkempt. She grabbed my arm, her grip incredibly tight. "Please, please don't go." I motioned to a stone bench. She sat down, looking completely pathetic. I remained standing. "I didn't mean it." She started tumbling words in a desperate rush. "Mom made me do the live stream. Gary threatened me. I love you. You're the only father I've ever known. I broke up with Tyler. I have massive debts, Robert. Please. You wouldn't let your little girl completely starve." I reached into my briefcase. I saw her eyes excitedly flicker. She thought I was pulling out the checkbook. Instead, I pulled out a thick blue binder. "This is the Madison Sullivan Education and Wedding Trust," I said softly. "I set this up 10 years ago. It has a balance of $500,000. Her eyes widened in pure awe. I heard her intake of breath. $500,000. It would solve all her problems. This trust is a strict contract with precise conditions, I explained. Clause A. The beneficiary must provide solid proof of graduation from a 4-year university. You dropped out sophomore year to pursue your influencer career. You used the tuition money to buy Botox. You forged the diploma. Her face went incredibly pale. I can explain, but I was willing to waive that. I cut her off smoothly. If you had easily passed the second condition. Clause B. The funds shall be fully released provided that the stepfather is acknowledged, respected, and highly honored as the father of the bride. Any act of public humiliation or malicious intent will result in the immediate revocation of the trust. I closed the binder. You had one job, Madison. You just had to treat the man who raised you with a fraction of respect. But you had to loudly tell the world I was just Robert. Dad, please, she begged, falling completely to her knees on the pavement. I'm sorry, I'll fix it. Just give me another chance. I took a gold pen from my pocket. The trust has a final clause. If conditions are unmet, I have the sole discretion to redirect the funds. I crossed out her name and wrote in the new recipient. The National Coalition for Homeless Veterans. It was never your money, Madison, I said coldly, and now it is going to people who actually know the profound meaning of sacrifice. I snapped a picture of the signed page and hit send. The transfer is officially initiated. The account is completely empty. Madison collapsed onto the concrete, making a guttural keen of absolute despair. The $500,000, her life raft, was instantly vaporized by her own intense arrogance. Goodbye, Madison, I said, stepping into a waiting taxi. I took the SIM card out of my phone, snapped it in half, and closed my eyes. The silence was finally full of absolute peace. 6 months is a long time in finance, but in Tuscany, it feels like a single afternoon. I sat on the stone terrace of the gorgeous farmhouse I had purchased, the air smelling of sweet ripening grapes. Arthur kept me updated. Gary was serving 3 years in the state penitentiary. Patricia was working a grueling lunch shift at a New Jersey diner. Madison's internet fame had violently turned against her, and she had completely deleted all her social media. I took a sip of my wine and felt a slight vibration on the stone table. It was a new phone, a local Italian number. I looked at the screen, a text from Patricia, begging for $5,000, trying to leverage our 15 years of marriage. I felt absolutely nothing, no anger, no pity. I walked to the crackling fireplace built into the wall of the terrace. I tossed the expensive phone. It spun in the air before landing perfectly in the heart of the fire. The screen turned black, then cracked. The smoke curled up, silencing her desperate pleas forever. I raised my glass of wine to the empty air, facing west toward the ocean and the prison cell. To Gary, I said steadily, thank you for paying for the party of this life instead of me. I sat back down, completely alone, completely free. For 15 years, I had built my life around people who saw me as nothing more than an endless resource, a walking bank account to fund their delusions of grandeur. They thought they were the main characters, and I was just the background scenery. They thought they could strip me of my dignity, my home, and my self-respect without any consequences. But they forgot one crucial detail. The man who holds the purse strings ultimately holds the power. I had given them everything, and when they decided to take even more, I showed them exactly what nothing felt like. Let them beg, let them cry, let them rot. The cold, hard truth is that loyalty is incredibly expensive, and betrayal should never be free. They were learning that lesson the hard way, in muddy backyards, in crowded prison cells, and in the greasy kitchens of roadside diners. As the Italian sun finally dipped below the beautiful horizon, painting the sky in vibrant shades of gold and deep purple, I took one last long drag of the fresh air. Tomorrow I would wake up early, not for a board meeting, not to pay another exorbitant credit card bill. I have grapes to harvest.